Hello. Now I'm gonna do chapter 6, which is human responses to the environment. So this is the nervous system basically, and I'm gonna use the transcript that I created really to do this human responses to the environment. So let's start. So step 1, human responses to the environment. So what are these human responses to the environment? These responses. So how can a human respond to the environment? So a human basically responds to the environment, right? And that that response can either be via the nervous system, so I call it a nervous system response, or the endocrine system, right? So the endocrine system is the one that basically maintains homeostasis within, right? And then so however the focus for this session is the nervous system. So what is the nervous system? Right. So simply the nervous system is made out of nerves, and it's a fast responding system, right? It's made out of nerves and it's a fast responding system, right? Compared to the endocrine system, which is actually made out of basically hormones, right? That are um secreted into the blood, right? And transported via the blood. So here in the nervous system, it uses signals, right, that travel via the nerves. So it doesn't travel via the blood like the endocrine system. So now we continue. So step 3, what is this nervous system made out of? So this nervous system is made out of two systems, right? Firstly, the first one is the central nervous system, which is primarily the brain and the spinal cord. So it's the brain and then spinal cord. That's the central nervous system. And then secondly is the peripheral nervous system, which is the nerves, right? The nerves basically. So we have the autonomic system. The peripheral system also has a autonomic system, right? So it has a system, and then nerves, like I said, it's mostly to do with nerves, and then the central nervous system is the brain and the spinal cord, right? So then let's go on. Step 4. So what is the brain, right? So we are here, the central nervous system. What is the brain? The brain is made out of delicate nerve tissues, right? Which cannot repair itself, right? That's why the brain is so protected, right? Do you see it's made out of these delicate tissues that cannot repair itself? Like if you get hurt, for instance, on your hand, like your body can easily repair that, né? But your brain, that's very hard. That's why like having a head injury, it's a serious issue. And then the brain is important because it controls all functions of the body, right? So it is delicate and also controls the functions of the body, right? Then um then you say so what is it protected by, right? So the brain is protected by a bony cranium, right? So the bony cranium is like the skull, right? So the skull straight, it's called the bony cranium, and then surrounded by three membranes, right? Called Mennings, right? So called Mennings, and that's where also the disease called meningitis comes from, right? So there's a problem with these Mennings, right? So it's surrounded by these Mennings, right, which also protect, right, and cushioned by a fluid called cerebrospinal fluid, right? So obviously because this brain is this delicate organ, it has to be cushioned by something, right? Otherwise it will experience shock every time like um you move your head. I wanna like when we move our head, we don't feel our brain knocking against like the skull, right? It is because of this cerebral spinal fluid, right? And then we are going to go to page 156 for different functions of the brain, right? So the brain has these different functions. Okay, so the first one is the cerebrum, right? So do you see this one, cerebrum? So cerebrum is the largest part of the brain, divided in two hemispheres, right, which are connected by the corpus callosum, right? So the corpus callosum is this thing, right? So here we have two hemispheres, and then what's the function of it? So the function of it is controls voluntary functions. So actions that you do by will, right? Like working, writing, speaking. So actions that you do because you wanna do, right? Like not like blinking your eyes. Blinking your eyes is not voluntary, it's involuntary. One. And then mara, it can also be voluntary, so it can also be controlled by this thing. So anything voluntary is this, and then receives and interprets sensations from sense organs, right? So it's also responsible for sensing. uh, like I explained last time that you actually see with your brain, you actually do everything with your brain, because the brain is the one that's responsible for processing that information. So without the brain, the eye will not work, because the eye is just the receiver, Mari. The brain is like the computer. Then also process of higher thought. So that's why it's also like the biggest one for memory and intelligence and reasoning. So you use it, and then to allow communication between the two halves of the brain, right? And then we go to the cerebellum. So cerebellum is the second largest part of the brain, located behind the cerebrum, right? It coordinates skeletal muscles to bring about balance while moving, right? As in walking or running, right? It maintains balance, right? Do you see that this one does not really talk about like voluntary movement, right? This one it's for support. Do you see the cerebrum is for support, skeletal muscles, right? Uh, tone and posture, and it's also like for motor skills, right? So the cerebellum, if I can show you, it's located here. Even the way it's located, right? You can see like this thing is for balance, right? And then the next one is the medulla oblongata. So that's the lower part of the brain. It continues down into the body as the spinal cord, right? Then do you see what it controls? Controls breathing, heartbeat, swallowing. Do you see? And these things basically are non-voluntary, right? Like heartbeat, like you can control your heartbeat, right? Swallowing, you see. Then transmit impulses from the spinal cord to the brain. So yeah, it helps basically with the transmission of information from the spinal cord to the brain. Like I said, the brain is responsible for everything. So even like the way you are moving your hands or your fingers or your feet, like that's the brain's work. That's because you have nerves, right, that are attached to your muscles, right? So as you use your cerebrum, right, to direct your hand to like to move voluntarily, right? What happens is there's a connection between the brain basically, right, and the spinal cord, because the brain really is not really attached to my hand, right? How is the signal transmitted by the brain to the hand, right? It is transmitted because this hand is attached to a nerve, and this nerve is attached to a spinal cord, right? The spinal cord basically via the medulla oblongata, it connects to the brain, right? So let me show you where the medulla oblongata is. So do you see it's here, right? So it's attached to your spinal cord. And then um, so all of these functions really you just have to know them, right? Because like scientists just proved what this thing does. So you just have to know these functions. Coughing, sneezing, do you see? And then we go to the hypothalamus, right? The small section of the brain just above the pituitary gland, right? And this one is also very important, right? Because it's responsible for things like sleep, thirst, um, body temperature, emotions. You see, emotions, that's very important. You see, because it's also like, do you see it's here? Hypothalamus. Yeah. So these things we just have to know like the functions of them. That's the most important. Like I said, if you know how to draw that thing, right? You don't, it doesn't have to be perfect, Mari. If you can just draw it, label it, then after labeling it, like be able to describe what that label means and then the function of that label, right? Yeah. As you can see here, we haven't really dealt with any process yet. It's just knowing the label of those things. Now we go to the spinal cord. So the spinal cord is made out of delicate nerve tissues, right? Which cannot repair itself. So what does that tell you? It tells you that these two organs, right, um that are in the central nervous system, because the brain and the spinal cord is the central nervous system, right? Like I said here, brain and the spinal cord, central nervous system, right? It shows you that they are very delicate. That's why even someone who broke their spinal cord, like they cannot like walk, like because walking like it's a very advanced like very advanced skill. So it needs cooperation between the spinal cord and the and yeah, the spinal cord basically, and the brain, right? It needs that information, right? That's why it's very important. Like it's very even like dangerous. You can even die like if they break your spinal cord, right? Yeah, because it's essentially part of the brain. It's like the brain, right? Because it's connected to the brain. Then okay, so this is just a description of it. Protected by 33 vertebra. These are just bones, right? Um, discs with cartilage between um, them, right, to act as shock absorbers. But this is not very important. Okay, it also has these three membranes. This is very important. It also has these three membranes, the Mannings, right, and the cerebral spinal fluid, right. Then um, these are just the other facts, that the dorsal root. So this dorsal root is the spinal nerve. It enters the spinal cord, and then the ventral root to the spinal nerve exits the spinal cord, right? And what is the function? Like I said, transmit impulses, right, from receptors to the brain and from the brain to effectors, right? Yeah. And then that's basically that one. And then step 7, we start with these things called neurons, right? So what is these neurons? Now, do you see that we are here in the peripheral nervous system, right? So what? No, we are not there yet. We are not there. We're still dealing with neurons. What are neurons? They're specialized cells which connect the brain and the spinal cord, right, to all other parts of the brain, right? Yeah, this is not the central nervous system. This is like peripheral, because you're talking about nerves now, right? Connection between nerves, right? And now we're gonna go to the structure of the neuron, right? So structure of the neuron, right? So structure of the neuron says is on one page 158. So page 158. Okay, so this is the neuron, right? This is basically how the neuron looks. Then says there are 3 types of neurons, right? Sensory neurons, right? Which transmit impulses from receptors to the central nervous system, right? So it transmit impulses from receptors to the central nervous system. That's what the sensory um, neurons do. And what does this mean? I get a sensory means sense, right? It senses, right? Like I said, we sense via our brain, right? Because it uses like the cerebellum, right? So that's why it says this. central nervous system, right? From receptors to central nervous system, right? And then interneuron, it so it says it connects, right, the sensory neuron to a motor neuron in the central nervous system, right? Yeah. So it connects. It basically connects those those two those two neurons. So it connects the sensory neuron and the um, the motor neuron, right? And I don't know why it says central nervous system. I think it's supposed to say peripheral nervous system because um, they're only connected when you're talking about reflex arcs. Mare, we are gonna do them now. So now it's motor neurons. So motor neurons transmit impulses from the central nervous system to the effectors, right? Yeah. So these ones they transmit right from. So these ones are the ones that allow you to react, basically, right? Then it functions via synapses, right? Right. So what is a synapse? A synapse is a functional connection between um the axion of one neuron. So what is the axion of one neuron? Is the bottom, basically the exit of the neuron, right? Don't forget that a neuron, right? A neuron is responsible, right, for transmitting impulses, right? So or stimuli, Mara, it's called an impulse, yeah. So what happens is the impulse travels in the cell, right, through these dendrites, right, and then it exits via the axion, right. That's what I meant here. So it's a functional connection. So what is a synapse? It's a functional connection between the axiom of one neuron, so the tip of one neuron, right, and the dendrite of another, right. So it's a connection between that because not forget that these things are connected, and these you don't have just like one neuron, you have many neurons. So these neurons are connected, and then they have to send these impulses, so they have to be connected to each other. So if you have two neurons, you're going to have one basically having an axiom of its own, and that axiom is going to be connected to the dendrite because, like I said, an impulse, it gets in through the dendrites and then it exits via the axiom. So the synapse is a connection between the dendrite of one neuron with the axion of another, right? And then um, this basically um, connection is possible by these neurotransmitters, right? So what is these neurotransmitters? Is chemicals um, that basically cross a gap, right, between the axion and dendrite to transmit the impulse. So it's like a chemical nyan, like chemical substance that basically allows for that impulse to be transmitted, right? So that's basically explaining what a synapse is. Now we go to the reflex now. What I was talking about. So reflex arc. So reflex is involuntary, right? Right. So what you do involuntary first. So reflex is a quick automatic response to a stimuli, right? So and in most cases it's done to protect the body, right? Like for instance, if you um put your hand like on a hot plate, like your hand will move very fast, right? To protect your body. That's a reflex, right? So what is a reflex arc? It's a pathway along which an impulse is transmitted to bring about a response to stimuli during a reflex action, right? So reflex arc basically it just explains that it's a pathway because like I told you, right? The fact that you can feel the table that you are holding is because there was a signal transferred through your nerves, right, to your brain, right? That tells you that um you are holding something, right? You're holding a table, right? That's what happens. That signal, right? Do you see that there's a pathway in which that impulse goes, right? And then what happens is, let's say I want to move my hand my brain is gonna send a signal, right, to my hand, right, to allow it to move, right, right. Basically, when I say to my hand, to the muscles in my hand to allow me to move, right. So a reflex arc, basically, do you see that in that case, the brain is still the control center, right? Everything is via the brain, but with the reflex arc, it's not via the brain, right? It's an arc, right? So it's taking another 10, right? And then it basically um does the decision for you without the brain, right? So it doesn't consult the brain, it just it just goes via a connection via an interneuron, connects it to the motor neuron, and then you basically react, right? And let me show you what I mean. But the brain is not really involved in this one. Do you see? The brain is not really involved here, because what happens is this thing is done without really conscious you're not really consciously involved when this happens, right? So the cerebellum is not here. You see, uh, not cerebellum, I mean cerebrum. Yeah, cerebrum is not here, right? So that control center is not here. Do you see? You have this interconnection. So it's basically it's that automatic response. You don't do it intentionally, right? Yeah. And then the peripheral nervous system. So that's one part of the peripheral nervous system, the reflex part. Then you also go that the peripheral nervous system, like I said, it's nerves outside the central nervous system. It has 12 pairs of cranial nerves and 31 pairs of spinal nerves, right? And then we have the autonomic nervous system, right? Which allows, okay, so this just explains what the nerves do, right? And then there are these two terms that I want to explain, right? So these two terms are called, um, one is called sympathetic and one is called parasympathetic. So your body in most cases must be in a parasympathetic mode because you mustn't be stressed at all cases, right? And then sympathetic mode is when your body is in like in emergency, right? That's so what happens is um your heart start beating fast. Um I think they are basically, yeah, your heart starts beating fast. There are a lot of like indicators that show that like you're in the sympathetic mode. Let me just go to the table. You see, heart rate increases, blood constricts. Do you see? Blood pressure. Oh, yeah. Do you see? So this is when you are stressed, basically. That's why it explains. Yeah. And then that's basically the nervous system, right? And all you have to do is just check the diseases there. Um, yeah. And please just text me again if you have any questions. Thank you.